someone painted over this word, and it changed who was allowed to conquer whom. The first person to carry that word across the stone was a Japanese army officer. He said he was clearing moss. Korean scholars later called it a disguise. The stone has been saying two different things ever since. The monument stands in Ji'an, a city in northeast China. It was the capital of Goguryeo, a Korean kingdom that once ruled much of the region. 6 meters of volcanic rock, 4 sides, nearly 1,800 Chinese characters cut straight into the stone. A biography of a king who claimed descent from heaven and earth. 18 years old when he took the throne in the year 391, he would become Gwanggaeto, a title meaning the broad expander of the domain. His wars pushed the kingdom west into China and south down the Korean peninsula. He sent 50,000 troops to rescue Silra, another Korean kingdom, and shattered invading forces from ancient Japan. And then, centuries later, someone put lime on the stone. The lime is gone now, but the argument it created has never worn away, because the dispute is not really about a missing stroke or damaged punctuation. It is about who gets to claim the past and what happens when the evidence itself has been touched. What did the stone originally say? In 1883, the officer traveled through Chinese-controlled Manchuria, dressed as a herbalist. He was really a lieutenant in the Imperial Japanese Army gathering intelligence. Near the river separating China from Korea, he found a weathered granite pillar. What he took was not even a proper ink rubbing. It was a tracing. He carried it back to Tokyo, and by 1884 it was in the hands of the Japanese Army's general staff. But the officers made one assumption they never checked. They assumed they knew whose story they were reading. For 5 years they studied one passage. In 1889 they published their interpretation. It claimed that in the year 391 forces from early Japan had crossed the sea and made subjects of Baekje and Silra, 2 Korean kingdoms in the south. If that was true, Japan had ruled part of Korea 1,000 years before its modern occupation. It was a convenient claim for an expanding empire. There was only one problem. Japan had not built the monument. It marked the grave of a Korean king, the most dangerous ruler his neighbors ever faced. Read it one way, and a country loses its own history. The monument is written in classical Chinese. There are no spaces between words and no punctuation between sentences. The reader must decide where one thought ends, where the next begins, and who is performing each action. The disputed line says that in the Sinmyo year, the year 391, forces called Hua came, crossed the sea, defeated Baekje and Silra, and made them subjects. Hua is an old label usually connected here with early Japan, but move a sentence break or change the implied subject and the meaning flips. Korean scholars argue that the army crossing the sea was not Hua at all. It was Goguryeo, the Korean kingdom that erected the stone. Several reconstructions exist, none has one universal agreement. And here is what should stop everyone cold. The 2 characters that would settle who crossed the sea are precisely the ones broken away from the stone. There is another crack in the Japanese interpretation. In this period, Hua did not always mean a unified Japanese state. It could also describe seafaring groups closer to southern Korea, and the surviving records of Baekje and Silra mention no Japanese conquest in 391. That is the crux. Damaged letters, no punctuation, and a subject the reader must infer, carrying the weight of who conquered whom. Read it one way and a country loses its own history. The monument was raised in the year 414 by a son beside his father's grave. His father was Gwanggaeto, the king whose title meant broad expander of the domain. He took the throne at about 18 and died before 40. In those 20 years, the monument says he captured 64 fortified cities and 1,400 villages. In the year 400, it says, he sent 50,000 soldiers south to rescue Silra from forces allied with Baekje and Hua, and drove them away. Then he did something a subordinate king was not supposed to do. He declared his own era name, Yongrag, meaning eternal rejoicing. Historians read that as Goguryeo announcing that it stood equal to the great empires of China, not beneath them, equal. This is why the monument matters. It is not decoration, it is a receipt. 6 meters of granite itemizing the reach of a Korean kingdom whose territory extended deep into land that is now China. That is why the sentence about 391 is worth fighting over. Whoever controls that line can reshape what kind of power Goguryeo was, and whose history it belongs to. 90 years after the officer found the monument, a scholar would accuse Japan of carving a lie into the stone itself. In 1972, the Korean scholar Lee Jin-hee made an accusation that detonated across China, Korea, and Japan. He argued that the Japanese army had covered the monument in lime, recarved its characters, and fabricated the line that made Japan the ancient master of Korea. For decades, that became the explanation. The evidence, people believed, had been forged at the source. Then evidence against the accusation emerged from an unexpected direction. The Chinese scholar Xu Jianxin found the earliest known rubbing on the monument. It had been made before 1881, before the Japanese officer arrived and before the disputed lime coating. Yet it already contained the contested characters. Another Chinese researcher, Wang Jian examined the monument and interviewed families living nearby. The lime was real, but local rubbing makers had applied it to smooth the rough surface and sell cleaner copies to visitors and scholars. Not an army, not a forgery. The dramatic version, that Japan carved a lie into a Korean king's grave, does not hold. But notice what remains. The stone really was coated, its surface really was altered, and the sentence at the center of the dispute is still damaged. The mystery did not vanish. It simply lost its villain. Read it one way and a country loses its own history. You might expect a 1,600-year-old argument to cool. Instead, it reopened in our lifetime. Between 2002 and 2007, a Chinese government research program called the Northeast Project argued that Goguryeo, Gwanggaeto's kingdom, belonged to Chinese history rather than Korean history. In 2004, the dispute left academia. South Korea summoned the Chinese ambassador. Seoul created an entire research institute to answer the claim. Relations between the two capitals genuinely frayed. And here is the geography that makes it sting. The monument does not stand in either modern Korea. It stands in Ji'an inside China. The tomb, the pillar, and the disputed sentence all sit inside the country now claiming the king as part of its own past. The same history, contested from two directions. First by an empire to the east, then by a state to the west. Gwanggaeto spent 20 years proving how far his kingdom could reach. His son spent a fortune in granite making sure no one forgot it. 15 centuries later, the boast remains. But the argument around it never closed. A soldier carried away the first tracing. A scholar cried forgery. the forgery charge collapsed, and the sentence at the center remains a set of worn marks that different readers still claim as their own. The stone is real. What it says is still contested. Read it one way, and a country loses its own history. Read it the other, and perhaps it never lost anything at all.